Shanmugh Prabhuji, if you're talking, you are on mute probably.
Sorry. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji and Prabhuji, for giving opportunity to speak through one of the deep analytical subject, mostly related to the Sankhya. And thank you, Supreme Lord Shri Krishna, for giving this opportunity, and Srila Prabhupada for facilitating to study this scripture through his great works. I'll just start with quick prayer. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Vasudevasutam Devam Kamsachanuramadhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Geetam Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva Eko Mantrastasya Namani Yani Karmapi Ekam Tasya Devasya Seva. Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna. So this chapter, chapter number 13, which is referred as the nature, enjoyer, and the consciousness, as per the Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita commentary. And just start with some quick background. So the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, we know it talks primarily about the karma, the Nishkama Karma Yoga, and how it leads to bhakti. And the middle 6 chapters talks exclusively about bhakti, the devotional service. And the last 6 chapters, which is the jnana part, and this chapter is the first chapter. All these 6 chapters talk about jnana and how jnana leads to bhakti. So that way Krishna gradually elevated our consciousness, starting from Nishkama Karma Yoga to Bhakti Yoga to Jnana Yoga. And we can see the Bhakti Yoga is sandwiched between these two. That is the sublime and the crest jewel of Bhagavad Gita. And as we progress in this chapter also, we will clearly understand why Krishna kept Bhakti Yoga in the middle. That is something which I wanted to talk about it. And just wanted to give quick background of the relationship of this particular chapter with reference to previous chapters. And in some in some lectures, it was mentioned that it's not necessarily that it is a continuation of chapter number 12, but it is out of inquisitiveness. Arjuna has asked questions to Krishna, and that's how this chapter has started. But also there are some lectures which tells about, in verse number 12.7, Krishna says, for the people who worship him and meditates on him with unalloyed devotion, for them he takes special attention to deliver them from this mrityu samsara. So he says that tesham aham samuddhatta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami nacharat pardha maya veshita chetasam. So, but we know bhakti can give the ultimate knowledge in the due course of time. But as we know, Krishna is the right spiritual master. He wants to basically give the right knowledge, starting from chapter number 13 to 18, and improve the consciousness of the jiva, so that he can entangle from this material world. So this particular subject matter is very deep-rooted, and it talks about the body and material nature, soul, super soul, and knowledge of both. And this particular knowledge helps one to detach from Maya and attach to Supreme Lord Shri Krishna. So the verse number 13.1 starts like this. Arjuna is, as you know, he's one of the very inquisitive student. And he started with a question saying that Prakritim Purusham Chaiva. I'll just quote few verses, not all. Prakritim Purusham Chaiva, Kshetram Kshetrajnam Evacha, Etadvetitam Ichchami, Jnanam Gneyam Cha Keshava. So Keshava he used, whenever he used Keshava, it means that he has some critical doubt and he wants to get rid of his ajnana from the answers of Krishna. So Arjuna has 6 questions in this. The first question is, what is Prakriti, material nature? The second question is like, what is Purusha, the enjoyer? And the third question is, what is Kshetram? That is the field and field of activity. And the Kshetrajna, the fourth question is the Kshetrajna. So Kshetrajna is, the knower of the field of activity. And then Jnanam, what is knowledge? And then the way to obtain that particular knowledge. And then Jnayam, what is object of the knowledge? So these are the 6 questions Arjuna put forward with his inquisitiveness for all our sake. And then Krishna answered the first question, saying that idam sariram kaunteya, very briefly, he said, idam sariram kaunteya, kshetram ityabhidiyate, etadyo vetitam kahu, kshetrajna iti tadvidaha. So Krishna answered saying that this body, whatever the body we have, it's called the field of activity. And who knows this body is called the knower of the field. So we'll see who is the knower of the body and the content. If you look at the purport from Prabhupada's content, it has really great explanation talking about how this material, how the living entity is entrapped in this material world and what is the purpose of this particular chapter, right? So if we look at the living entity, it is conditioned and it has taken birth and taken certain body based on the past karmas, and it is taken certain body based on its desires from the subtle body during the demise, during leaving the body in the previous birth. And he wanted to enjoy. As we know, we take the birth because we wanted to enjoy independent of Krishna. So to enjoy its own capacity, it gets a body, right? So that is how we take a body. And then once we entrapped into this material world due to 3 modes, this process keeps going on. And it is very difficult without taking shelter of Krishna to beat this birth and death cycle. So the later Krishna and Prabhupada explained, so the person who is not identified this body is said to be Kshetrajna, and we also call it as soul. And later we'll see there are Kshetrajna who is knower of the field. He's not just only the soul, but there is another super knower we'll talk about in the later verses. And we know that the soul being in this body itself experiences lot of changes, like until it goes to death and until it takes another body. So it goes through a lot of changes. So Prabhupada gives nice analogy, how this identification, what does this identification means, right? We falsely identify ourselves as body, but we always say it's my finger, it is my scar and everything. So that my is nothing but you are different from it says that we are different from the body, so that it clearly gives what is our true identification. So all the other things, whatever we give, it is the false, identification, the material identifications, designations, what we give it to ourselves. So in this chapter, in summary, mainly we talk about what is the material nature, and as we said, the later part of this chapter depends on the answers of these 6 questions, how Krishna has delivered the answers to these 6 questions. So in this chapter also explains one thing I found very interesting is it also explains about the composition of this whole body and the transformation of the body. And then, how living entity, the soul, right, which is in the midst of the body, but it is different. It is uncontaminated. So in verse number 3, after talking about just briefly about, whoever knows this field of activity is the knower, he's said to be the soul. In verse number 13.3, Krishna said, I am also the knower of the bodies. Kshetrajnam chapimam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. I am also Kshetrajna. But the difference between me and the individual living entity is I know about all the fields and its activities. And also he put forward his opinion saying that whoever knows this field of activity and who is the knower of the field, and whoever understands both of this knowledge, that is called the knowledge. So the one who understands this body and the knower of the body, what is the soul, he is the person said to be in knowledge. So that's what Krishna said, it is in opinion. And in previous chapters, we try to understand what is the consciousness of a person who is in true knowledge. He is the one who understands that I'm not the body, I'm the soul, and I'm eternal servant of Krishna, and I am the part and parcel of Krishna, and Krishna is the absolute truth. So this is the the consciousness of a person who is in true knowledge. So here, if you look at further elaborate this knowledge, analytical study about this Sankhya, we can understand what is knowledge means, understanding the material nature very clearly, understanding the enjoyer and supreme enjoyer very clearly, and the controller of both the living entity and the material nature, who is the supreme controller, and then interaction between the Purusha and Prakriti. So if we look at it, why Krishna said, I am Kshetrajna, I am the knower of all the fields, because Krishna is the constant companion. He lives in all hearts as a super soul, where he highlighted in so many verses. And he accompanies every living entity when the living entity takes certain body based on the past karmas, but no matter whether it is a dog or hog, Krishna will be situated along with that living entity within the heart. So he knows about the past, future, present, all the karmas of that particular living entity. So Prabhupada further explains this, saying that the true knowledge, as always he says, understanding that the super soul and soul are one qualitatively, but quantitatively they are different. And the super soul is the controller of all the fields, and the soul is, conditioned, and it knows about only one field, and which is his own body, right? And then Prabhupada also gave some quick example, like, the king and, the citizen. The citizen knows about his own field, and king knows the entire field. So the citizen is kind of, the soul who has understanding of his own field, but the king is like a super soul. So that is the kind of analogy that Prabhupada gives every time to make sure that the layman's understanding, even the layman studies, even though he doesn't understand philosophy, he gets the crux of it. In verse number 4, Krishna highlighted the contents, what he is going to summarize. He said that, yat kshetram yat chayadricha yadvikari yadaschayat sachayo yat prabhavasya tat samasena meshunu. So he wanted to tell what he is going to cover briefly going forward in the latter part of the verses. So he said, I'm going to explain you the field of activity and, the knower of the field and the composition of body and the changes of the body, changes produced in the body, when they are produced, what are the influences, and all these things he wanted to explain in brief. And we know that the field of activity is the body, and knower of the field is the soul, or a field and field of activity is the soul or the super soul, and the super soul is the controller. So he has said that I'm just telling in brief, but let's see, like, where the details of this, where there is a detailed analytical study is performed, right? Krishna is the ultimate authority, and whatever he says, without a question, undoubtedly, it is the supreme knowledge and one must accept it. But however, even though Krishna's position is supreme, as a right, Krishnam, like we say Krishnam Bande Jagadgurum, like right spiritual master, he has given the authentic scriptural reference, right? For any spiritual topic we talk, I also see Sri Gaur Prabhuji. Whenever we talk anything, he always asks reference, where from you got it? In the similar way, because this question can come everywhere, right? There are so many peoples and scholars, so many commentaries. So Krishna said, he set an example by giving the right scriptural reference. So he has said this knowledge of field of activities is described elaborately in, Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra, and Rushibir Bahuda Gitam. He has said that he has said that by Vedic hymns, and also by the complete cause and effect. Vedanta Sutra is like, the analytical study. It's again complete cause and effect, which was compiled by Vyasadeva. And Vedanta is the end of Vedanta, the complete essence of Vedas, which comes Upanishads, and the Vedanta Sutra comes under that particular category. And every Veda associated with the particular Upanishad. So in this one chapter, Prabhupada has quoted a lot of Vedanta Sutras and then the quick verses from Upanishads. So the key people who have contributed for this, it's like Vyasadeva, who has written this Vedanta Sutra. In general, Parasara Muni also has done significant contributions if you look at it from the Prabhupada's purport. Kathopanishad explains the distinction between the soul and super soul and the body. And if you look at it, the living entity trapped into one or other body, as we discussed before, helplessly, depending on his past karmas. And the living entity is covered by various levels of existence, the soul, right? So the soul is, let us assume, that is the true nature, the eternal position. But it covered by various concepts, just covered by various layers, right? So there is various layers of existence, and in various layers of realization the living entity will have. This was very beautifully explained by Prabhupada in the purport. I'll just quickly touch upon. So the living entity has 5 levels of existence, or you can say that consciousness. First is the Annamaya Kosha, the second one is the Pranamaya Kosha, and the third one is Manomaya Kosha, and the fourth one is Vijnanamaya, fifth one is Anandamaya. That means, actually, if you technically speaking, what I understand is, even want to elevate his consciousness to the highest state, which is Anandamaya, understanding the the supreme, and having the eternal bliss of the connection with the Supreme Lord. But all these stages, the living entity cross through all these stages and then have the highest realization of the Anandamaya, that is like the having the direct relationship with Supreme Lord. In Annamaya Kosha, it's like animalistic consciousness always thinks food as the absolute truth. And in Pranamaya Kosha, the living entity understands that it is conscious and then defends itself from all aspects because it has consciousness. And the realization is that it realizes himself with the life symptoms. And then Manomaya Kosha, at this level, it's at the mind level, and it will start thinking philosophically about the way of the life. And the realization in this level is like thinking, feeling, and willing. I'm just taking all this from the purport. And then the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is higher level of consciousness, but not the highest. At this level, the Jiva understands that he is not the body and he is the spirit soul. And for him, the soul is the ultimate object of the realization, and he is at the level of the soul. He realizes, he has the self-realization, and he also understands soul is separate from the field of objects. In Anandamaya Kosha, as I mentioned, the consciousness is, he develops a blissful relation with Supreme Personality of God through the devotional service. And he has a direct relation, and he has, the blissful nature. He understands he's Sachidananda Swarupa, and also the Sachidananda nature of Supreme Lord. And also he knows clearly the discrimination between the Supreme Lord and, himself, right? We know that he is Vira Swarat, and then we are like, Anu, Sindhu and Bindu. So that is what is explained pretty well, and I really found this analogy very interesting. In verse number, as mentioned, after explaining, the field of activities, and also the knower of the field, Krishna talked entered a little bit more into our own body and started explaining what does this body constitutes of. Just to answer the questions from the verse number 4. So he has said, Mahabhutanyahankaro, Buddhir Avyaktam Evacha, Indriyani Dasaikamcha, Panchendriya Gocharaha. So he has said that, this body consists of we always tell that it is made of Pancha Mahabhut, that is the gross body. And then it also has the subtle body, which is like false ego, mind, and intelligence. So total it became 8. And then we have 10 senses, 5 jnanendriyas and 5 karmendriyas. And we know all of them. And then there are like 5 sense objects associated with these 5 jnanendriyas. So altogether, it is like 24 gross elements. And that buddhi avyaktam means that is the unmanifested version of the material nature, which comes directly from Mahavishnu as dead matter, in which the modes are not active. So the body contains all these 24 elements. So it's like a lot of analytical studies required to understand this and the interaction of this body with the interaction of this living entity with these all elements. So due to this, we have the subtle body, and Krishna has explained in the same verse, what are the transformations, what are the changes happen. And the subtle body mind is the most important aspect. So the mind, due to its interaction with the material nature, it develops qualities like desire, hatred, happiness, life symptoms, convictions. These are the things which are experienced. So this is what Krishna has talked about, basically till chapter verse number 7 about Kshetra, Kshetrajna, and the knowledge. In the next 4 verses, Krishna explained elaborately about about the process of acquiring knowledge. So there are like 20 qualities which Krishna has explained in depth among this. So the first was like anamiktam, adambiktam, ahimsa champirajyavam, acharya upasanam saucham, stairyam atma vinigraha. So that's the first verse. And there are like, similarly, there are like 5 verses. It goes on up to, realizing the absolute truth. And Krishna said, these are all the key qualities, and this is the process of acquiring the knowledge. Anything other than this is, he said that it is ignorance. So just to give some understanding that Prabhupada has put forward in the purport again, there is a misconception that the knowledge is about, understanding the interaction of all the 24 gross elements, what we talked about, which is not true. The knowledge is about the soul, which is trapped in this particular body, which consists of all these 24 elements, which is entangled, and how to get rid of this entanglement and, reach to the supreme abode. So that is the knowledge. That is the true knowledge. That is the reason Krishna said that anything else is ignorance, right? Because there is a lot of material knowledge. There are a lot of material scientists, a lot of scholars. But all that doesn't help us to achieve the ultimate goal. That's why he said, he just rejected saying that anything else other than this, what I have stated here, it is all going to be ignorance. So the process of knowledge, if you look at the most important aspect of this particular verse, Sri Gaur Prabhu also explained in chapter number 12. I got it very clear. How do we get all these characteristics, or how do we acquire all these knowledge aspects? It is very, very difficult by mundane practice or mental speculation, and by studying or forcefully controlling our senses. It's very difficult. So the most important aspect of this is the verse number 11, which says, Maichananya yogina bhaktir avyabhicharini vivikta desha sevitam aratirjana samsasi. So here Krishna said the process of acquiring knowledge is the main aspect of acquiring knowledge is to perform unalloyed devotional services. So doing the pure bhakti. If one engages in the pure bhakti, all other 19 qualities of knowledge definitely will follow. And we saw it in chapter number 12 also. So many characteristics of devotee were explained, but I personally felt it's impossible to practice even one of them without the mercy of Supreme Lord. And to gain that Supreme Lord, we have to, perform pure, unalloyed devotional services. And Srimad Bhagavatam, in this purport, Prabhupada covered, verse number 5.8.1 8.12 says, Yasya yasti bhakti bhagavatya kinchanaha sarvai gunai tatra samasate suraha. So this is same thing, expanding the same thing what Krishna has explained. All good qualities of knowledge develop when one attains the stage of pure devotional service. So devotional service is the first thing. So once we give highest importance and perform with true love to Krishna and understanding the true relationship with Krishna, everything else will follows. And there are like other qualities which was very important, like anamitvam. Humility is the most important, feeling that we are insignificant and don't feel pride even there is a need there, even there is a cause for you being pride. Feel humble. This is the most important to perform the devotional service. Adambitvam is like dambitvam, showing unnecessary false pride and prejudice, even though there is no reason. So which should not be there. So a devotee should never expect honor from others. But if it comes due to his contributions or due to his services, fine, he has to accept and surrender it to Krishna, right? Because it is not like, we should, if something coming naturally as Krishna's will, you should just accept and surrender it to Krishna. But we should never expect any honor or pride. And Prabhupada mentioned non-violence is like, spreading Krishna consciousness and elevate the spiritual consciousness of living entities. And simplicity, we should always deal with simplicity, not be too much diplomatic, too much political. Don't try to manage unnecessarily like we do it in the corporate world. And accepting the spiritual master, as it was explained in verse number 4.34. And once the self-realized spiritual master, if we approach him with surrender, submissiveness, and the service, he blesses us, and if we accept him as a spiritual master, the devotional service will become seamless. And the ego, if you look at our real ego, is like Jivare Swarupa, Nitya Krishna Das. If anything other than that is like a false identity. But we live most of our time with that false identity until we realize our true identity. That most of the time our existence happens because of that. Once we don't understand about that we are the spirit soul. So that and also the few other things which is important. There is a verse saying that detach from from the family and putradara gruhadisu, right? So it is very important to understand. It's not about just staying away from them. So taking care of their emotional needs and material needs, everything nicely, and without disrupting your devotional service, right? So it is so important that we take care of their emotional needs, but that is all affection. But the attachment is something like what Dhritarashtra has on Duryodhana, which we should not have. Even he is doing all wicked things and the whole world knows, and Dhritarashtra is not able to condemn him. Not condemn him, at least he has never attempted to tell that, please do not do this. So that kind of attachment, we should not be there, but we have to be affectionate, and holistically, we have to take care of our family members. So, and also, if we look at then Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam, Tattva Jnana Ardha Darshanam. So this self-realization starts from identifying ourselves with our constitutional position and perform devotional service. As we keep performing devotional service, we will attain the realization and the relationship with the Supreme Lord, and we understand our Swarupa and we understand our true relation, right? So one point I just try to highlight from this whole verse: one who performs unalloyed devotional service to Lord will gain all other good characteristics to keep himself in true knowledge, and gaining the remaining characters will automatically follow. And for one who performs the bhakti in relationship with Lord, the true knowledge will be revealed by the Lord, as it was mentioned in 10.10, right? So there is nothing like anything else we do other than devotional service. The true knowledge will be fall short of the knowledge, and that knowledge is not the true knowledge. What is true knowledge? As it is explained, that knowledge which gives the pure love of Krishna for a devotee, and gives the liberation by being with this particular body. So after talking about, all these like Kshetrajna, and I mean, field of activities, knower of the field, knowledge, and the process of knowledge, Krishna moved his attention to the object of knowledge. So in verse number 13.13, Krishna said, Nyayam yattat pravakshami yajñātvā amritamasmate anādimat param brahma nasaptan nasaduchyate. So he has said, now I will explain the knowable, by knowing which you will taste the eternal, and Brahman, the spirit soul, which is eternal and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect. So if you look at the further expansion of this verse, Prabhupada is mainly focusing on, Krishna is mainly focusing on the object of the knowledge to begin with, the soul, right? So both the knowledge of soul and super soul, when we understand these two, the relationship between these two, if we understand clearly and perform devotional service, one, we can attain the nectar, or we can attain our Swarupa and reach Supreme Lord. So if we look further, the living entity, we never know when the living entity has come first time onto this particular planet, right? And we also don't know when it has originated from Supreme Lord. And there are several verses to confirm this in Kathopanishad 1.2.18, and also Bhagavad Gita has similar verse as it is, Najayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyaha. The knower of the body, which is like the soul, which is eternal and never born and never dies. So that's the meaning of that particular verse. And also the Svetavatar Upanishad says, as per, again, this is all from Prabhupada's grace, the Supreme Lord is the chief knower of the body and master of the three modes. So it's Svetasvatara Upanishad says that the Supreme Lord is the chief knower of the body and all the bodies and master of the three modes. Again, he is the transcend to three modes, but he's the master of three modes. And that's so the emphasis of this verse is the Brahman mentioned here is about the living entity, which is related to individual soul, Vijnana Brahma, not Ananda Brahma. Ananda Brahma is related to the Supreme Lord. So that's what here Prabhupada wanted to confirm in this particular verse. And from verse number 13.14 to 18, Krishna has elaborately explained about the super soul, the characteristics of the super soul. So the super soul is all pervading nature. We know that the super soul exists in all living entities as Paramatma. So this particular verse talks about his legs, his hands, his eyes, his faces. He has many faces. They spread everywhere. And it is mentioned that super soul pervades everything, right? As sun exists, diffusing unlimited rays. This is again from purport. He exists in all pervading form, and in him, all living entities exist. We know how we all of us exist and how we came from. At the Pralay call, we enter into, the partial inhalation and full inhalation. We enter into Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, and then again, we will get the new, we don't get the new, but we will be accepting the body from the original nature, right? From the previous, whenever at the time of inhalation, whatever is our nature, from there, we take another body. And this also says that he has many living entities within him, many hands and all that. for a soul, it is not possible to climb above this. Only for super soul we can climb this. And also he is situated far in his abode. But we can see from verse number 9.26, anything we offer with love, patram pushpam phalantoyam, he takes it, he accepts it with his hands. So that is the subtle nature of the Lord, which we cannot understand by our material senses. And in Brahma Samhita also, 5.37, it says, he lives in Goloka, performs his transcendental activities, and he is living in everyone's heart as Paramatma. So the message what Prabhupada wanted to give from this verse is that it is difficult. Super soul is, the ultimate supreme, and it is not conditioned, and the living and individual soul is conditioned, and it has limited potency. So the potencies of super soul and individual soul are totally different. So next verse, so Prabhupada wanted to, Krishna explained the, the transcendental nature of the senses of the super soul. It says that Sarvendra Gunabhasham, Sarvendra Vivarjitam, Asaktam Sarvabhuchaiva, Nidgunam Gunabhoktracha. So the super soul is the origin of all source, the source of all senses. And he's without senses. He is unattached, but he's maintainer of all living entities. We have seen similar verses in 9th chapter, 9.4 and 9.5, because Krishna's energies will maintain this world. Through his energies, he maintains the world. And he is transcendental to three modes, at master of all three modes. So the senses of the purport, Prabhupada has explained, the senses of super soul are transcendental, and the jiva senses supposed to be transcendental. Originally, they were transcendental, but in interaction with the material nature, they became material. So they got contaminated. So Svetavatar Upanishad says, Supreme Personality of Godhead has no hands, but he accepts all sacrifices we offer to him. He lives everyone's heart and knows past and future. And this is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita also in verse number 7.26. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani cha Arjuna bhavishyani cha bhutani mam tu veda na kaschana. I know about everybody and everything, past, present, and future, but nobody knows about me. And also 4.6 confirms that Krishna comes millennium after millennium in his transcendental form, not contaminated by the material energy. So Krishna comes with his internal energy and not contaminated by the material energy. So I said that again, the verse number 16, 17, again, it talks about the supreme truth exists inside, outside of all living entities, Bahiram Tascha Bhutani, Acharam Charam Evacha. And because of his subtle nature, and our senses are not perfect, and our senses power is very low, so we cannot perceive about this. Although he is far and he is near to all. So we can't see him with material senses. One requires to purify his mind, senses through Krishna consciousness, and also by pure unalloyed devotional service, we can see him. And Bhagavad Gita 11.54 also confirms that Supreme Lord can be understood by only pure devotional service. So he appears to be divided, but he is situated as one, and he is the maintainer, and he devotes and develops all. So what does it mean? As per Vedic literature, one Vishnu present everywhere by his omnipotence, just as sun appears to many people in many places, even though there is one sun. As we know, he is the inhalator and the killer, and he is the source and the inhalation. So he rests, all living entities rest in him after inhalation, and all living entities originate from him during the creation. That means, though he is detached, he is the cause for the Prabhava and Pralaya, which is mentioned in verse number 7.6. Aham Kritsnasya Jagataha Prabhava Pralayastadha. And also, it's interesting to see in Bhagavad Gita also, he said that time I am the great destroyer. I came to destroy all these kings assembled here. So he said that, So this confirms that the super soul is, the verse, as it was explained in the verse, although he is the maintainer, right? It does not mean that he maintains us. He takes care of both our origin, Prabhava and Pralaya, and not only just maintenance. He is the source of annihilation and destruction also. So verse number 18 talks about, how this verse was there in some other chapters also. He is, the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness. He is knowledge and object of the knowledge, as we have seen, soul and super soul. And also he is the goal of the knowledge. So the goal of knowledge is like, ultimately all this goal of knowledge is to attain the ultimate love for Supreme Lord, right? So that is the ultimate goal of knowledge, and not liberate from the birth and death cycle. And he's situated in everyone's heart. And so Krishna stays in spiritual world. So it doesn't require any illumination, because his effulgence illuminates everything in the spiritual world. In the material world, it is covered by Mahat Tattva, so it requires, the intervention of sun and moon. So there are several, again, the Upanishads, Adityavannam Tamsa Parastat, Tameva Viditva Mrutyumati. And so he's like sun, eternally luminous, but far, far beyond the material world. And one must surrender him for liberation. And by knowing him, one can beat the boundary of birth and death. So that is what Krishna has explained in elaborate from verse number 14 to verse number 18. So in 13.19 is the summary of all this. In summary, Krishna has explained soul knows its own field of activities and conditioned with limited potency. Super soul is the knower and controller of all living entities, and superknower, distinct and eternally coexist. So the verse number 19, Krishna said, Iti kshetram tadajnanam nyayam chokta samasataha madbhakta yetad vijnaya madbhavayopapadyate. So Lord has explained field of activity, knowledge, noble, soul, super soul, process of acquiring the knowledge. But one thing to be understood, as we discussed about, all this, even though it is about deep analytical study, looks like physics, looks like, the complex metaphysics, but it doesn't require, great scholarship to understand. This perfect knowledge will definitely be understood by the pure devotees of Krishna who performs unalloyed devotional service. And with that particular knowledge, they attains the supreme nature of the Lord. So the summary, again, like after, as the nice part of this Bhagavad Gita is, how many ever verses we see Krishna concludes with bhakti. So he concluded saying that this is so analytical and so much about the analytical study of the body, soul, super soul, and everything. But only by performing the pure unalloyed devotional service, one will be able to get this knowledge, see all the knowledge without any hindrance. One will be able to attain this particular knowledge and then attain the nature of the Supreme Lord. So that is what I have tried to study and summarize. And please, give me the feedback, Prabhuji and Mataji. Thank you very much for your attention and giving me a little more time. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Chandra Prabhuji. So thank you for nicely summarizing this section of Bhagavad Gita. Like Krishna has already said that only devotees can understand this complex jnana about soul, super soul, and the nature and their interaction. What is the relationship between the two? So if if somebody wants to ask some questions or somebody has some comment, can put forward.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Excellent class, Mataji. Very clearly explained. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Shinmukji. So it was a great learning. Thank you so much.
So if no questions, we will move to the next section by Harshat Prabhu, verse number 20 to 35.
Sure, Mataji. Thank you so much, Mataji, and thank you so much, Shanmukh Prabhuji. As Padmaja Mataji mentioned, it was, brilliantly explained, the very complex, first 19 verses. So as Shanmukh Prabhuji, mentioned, the chapter 13, which is the first, chapter from the Jnana Yoga section of Bhagavad Gita, and it has been segregated in 6 sections for ease of our understanding overall. And there were 6 questions which were asked by Arjuna in the very first verse of this particular chapter. And out of the same, Shanmukh Prabhuji has, covered the first four sections, as well as, the first 4 questions from Arjuna. So in the last 2 sections, basically, Krishna would answer about Prakriti, that is the nature, and Purusha, that is Jiva, and confirms the both to be eternal. He also explains the relationship between the Prakriti and the Purusha, and knowing about the same, how can one, attain liberation? Uh, he also explains the various methods of liberations overall, and this is covered between the verses 20 to 26. And the last section can be considered as the bonus section from Krishna, because all the 6 questions from Arjuna are basically answered by Krishna by the verse 26. So the verse 27 to 35 in this particular chapter could be considered as, the bonus section where Krishna is helping us understand the vision of knowledge. Yeah. So as we have heard from Shanmukh Prabhu that, so far Krishna has explained about the Paramatma as the knower of the field. And now he would describe how Jiva, who is also a knower of the field, comes in contact with Maya. So Shanmukh Prabhuji has mentioned time and again that, the soul is embedded in the body, which is constituting of the 24 elements. But how does that happen? That would be explained by Krishna now. So in the 20th verse, basically Krishna helps us understand that the material nature, which is the Prakriti, and the Jivas or the living entities, that is Purusham, are beginningless, that is Anadi. And how they are beginningless? Because they are the energies of the Supreme Lord. And anything that is related to the Supreme Lord is Anadi, that is beginningless. And this we have also seen in the verses 7.4 and 7.5. If you recollect these verses, Bhumi Rapo Analo Vayuhu Kham Mano Buddhi Revacha Ahankara Itiyam Me Vinna Prakurthira Ashtada. And the 5th verse is 7.5, or maybe the verse 5th from the 7th chapter is Apareyam Itiyas Tva Anyam Prakrutim Vidhi Me Param Jiva Bhutam Mahabhaho Yayedam Dharyate Jagat. Where Krishna is explaining the 8, the gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, or ether, and the subtle elements, that is mind, intellect, as well as ego. These are his components. These are my components of the material energy. And in the 5th verse, he is basically telling that apart from these inferior energies, which is the gross element and the subtle elements, I have one superior energy, and that is the Jiva Shakti, or the soul energy, and which comprises the embodied souls who are the basis of life in this particular world. So far, we have understood that the body is the field of activities, right? That is the kshetra. And the knowers of the body, that is the kshetragya, are both the individual and the super souls. The body is made up of material nature, that is Pancha Mahabhutas, and the individual soul is embodied and is enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. he is the knower, and the other is the super soul. We need to understand that the individual soul and the super soul are different manifestations of the supreme personality of Godhead. They are not same. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the super soul is his personal expansion. This means the individual soul and super soul are not at the same platform. And this is also explained in the next verse, or maybe we can understand by looking at the next verse. Prabhupada also mentions in the purport that material nature was absorbed in the supreme personality of Godhead. We have also learned this in the Bhagavatam classes, right? Mahavishnu, and when it was needed, it was manifested by the Mahat Tattva. Similarly, the living entities are also in him. As they are conditioned, they are averse, or they are not accepting to serve the God and restricting their entries to the spiritual sky. So that is basically preventing their entries. But with the manifestation of the material world, these living entities are again given a chance to act and prepare to enter into the spiritual world. So our God is so merciful. The supreme personality of Godhead is so merciful that in spite of our aversion, in spite of our reluctance to serve the God, He is giving us so many chances again and again to enter the spiritual world. In the next verse, that is 13.21, Krishna explains the roles of Prakriti and Jiva also. And in the purport, Prabhupada mentions that there are 8.4 million different species of life created by the material nature. Why so many, species? What is driving that? What is driving this? So basically, this is driven by the different sensual pleasures of the living entities, or the desire of the living entities to have different sensual pleasures. So the desires of the jiva make it live in various bodies, and his material happiness and distress are due to his body and not himself. So because of the desire to lord it over the material nature, he is in the material world. The jiva, once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the the control of the nature, because the body being a matter, it has to act according to the laws of nature. So at that point, the living entity has no power to change that law. So once the jiva receives the body of a dog or hog, he does not have an option, but he would have to bark, he would have to wig his tail. And basically that will be, he will not have any choice but to act as per the laws of the nature. But the great thing about the supreme personality of Godhead is, in all circumstances, the super soul is always with the individual soul. He does not leave the individual soul to its own distresses of the body. This shows the love, the kindness, and the eagerness of the Lord to take us back to his own abode. In the next verse, Krishna explains the jiva's association with the modes of his transmigration. And Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji, in his video, he marks this particular verse as a Mahavakya, or maybe the seed verse for the rest of the Jnana Yoga section in Bhagavad Gita. And this verse basically reads, Purushaha Prakriti Stohi Bhungte Prakriti Jan Gunan Karanam Guna Sango Asya Sada Asad Yoni Ajanmasu. So it's explained in the second chapter also that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to the another body, just as one changes the dresses. If you recollect, we have learned this particular verse, Vasansi Jirnani Yatha Vihaya. Navani Granati, Naroparani, Tata Sharirani Vihaya Jirna, Anyani Sanyati, Navani De. So this change of dress, why this is happening? This is happening because of the jiva's attachment to the material existence. As long as he is captivated by his false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. And the jiva is put into different bodies due to association with different modes of nature. So one has to therefore rise above the three modes of the nature and become situated in the transcendental position, which is called as Krishna consciousness. So I generally feel like, we have been shackled, by the chains, the mode of goodness, the shackle of gold, then Rajasa, and then there is ignorance, that is Tamasa, right? So we have been shackled. So unless and until we rise above these modes, we will not be able to get our entries to the spiritual abode. And this has again been explained by Krishna in the second chapter, which is again, uh, the title of the second chapter is basically the summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita, right? So he has already explained that Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdondva Nitya Sattvasto Niryogakshema Atmavan. The verse 2.45. He is asking, Arjuna to rise above the three modes to a state of pure spiritual consciousness, not even in mode of goodness, and freeing yourself from dualities eternally fixed in truth and without concern for material gain and safety, be situated in the self. That is what Krishna is asking Arjuna to do. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another, because he has material desires since time immemorial. So Krishna consciousness could be considered as the one-time password for our entry to the spiritual abode. This is the only way, this is the only key which can actually help us get rid of the shackles and get above the material modes. In the next verse, Krishna is explaining the super soul to be the real Purusha. So here we can understand the super soul and the individual soul, how they are on different platforms. The verse reads, Upadrashta Anum the super soul, which is always with the individual soul, is the representation of the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadi philosophies or the monist philosophers, they consider that there is no difference between the super soul and the individual soul. They say, Aham Brahma Asmi. However, the Lord has clearly mentioned that he is represented as Paramatma in the body. Plus, he has also explained the qualities of the super soul. What are the qualities? These qualities are like Upadrashta Anumanta, that means a witness and observer, plus an approver also. He also explains that he is the supreme enjoyer. The individual soul does not have these qualities. Else, what would have happened? We could have done whatever we wanted because we ourselves would have been approver. But this does not happen. And that's the reason why, we need to understand the individual soul and the supreme soul, the super soul. They are on a different platform altogether. Unfortunately, the living entity has the tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently. We are actually misusing the small, minute independence that has been given to us by Krishna. Why do we are doing this? Because we want to attempt to dominate the nature. And because, the jiva has this tendency, he is called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The Lord is always eager to take him back to the spiritual abode. But the jiva misuses his marginal independence and rejects association of the spiritual lights, making him continue his material strife in the conditioned nature. It's almost like, our kids are going outside to play. The mother is calling them, please come back, please come back. And the kid is, engrossed in the play. And he does not want to, go back to the home, right? So thus an intelligent person who places his faith in the Paramatma or the Supreme Personality of Godhead begins to advance towards a blissful eternal life full of happiness and knowledge. In the 24th verse, Krishna confirms the result of this knowledge of Prakriti, Purushas, and the modes or the gunas will surely attain liberation from repeated birth. The living entity has by chance fallen into this material existence. We do not want to dig into, understanding why did we fall, but we need to understand what is the way out. By his personal endeavors, he has to understand his true position. What is his true position? Jivere Swarupe hoy Nitya Krishna Das. How can we understand the true position? Yes, by adhering to the spiritual triangle, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, by having association of the devotees, by reading scriptures, by following the instructions of our Guru, then it is certain that he will never come again into the material existence. So in the 25th and the 26th verse, Krishna explains other methods of liberation also. In the 25th verse, Krishna tells that, some see Paramatma through meditation, that is Dhyana or Ashtanga Yoga. We have seen this in the 6th chapter also. Others by cultivation of the knowledge, that is Sankhya or Jnana Yoga, etc. And others by, working without fruitive desires, like Nishkam Karma Yoga, etc. So the conditioned souls can be divided into two categories. Yeah, as far as the search for self-realization is concerned. So those who are atheists, agnostics, and skeptics can be considered beyond the sense of spiritual understanding. They probably do not even understand what is the spiritual world. And others are faithful in their understanding of spiritual life. And they can be called as introspective devotees, philosophers, or workers who have renounced their fruitive results. Yeah, karma sannyas and karma phala sannyas. We have learned this. In the next verse, Krishna continues to elaborate. In the 26th verse, he continues to elaborate how can one surpass the path of birth and death via bhakti by hearing. This verse is particularly applicable to the modern society. This hearing process is very important. We know that the 9 stages of bhakti basically start with Shravanam. And there are, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, and Atmanivedanam, right? But it starts with Shravanam. So Lord Chaitanya, Mahaprabhu, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, stress to hearing, because if the common man simply hears from the authoritative sources, he can progress. If one is fortunate enough to take the shelter of a pure devotee, hear, from him about self-realization and follow in his footsteps, one can gradually be elevated to the level of a pure devotee. And as the common man is often not as capable as the so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help him transcend material existence and go back to Godhead. So Krishna is also giving us the understanding of, the path of how can we go back to the Godhead. So by now, Krishna has answered all of Arjuna's 6 questions, which were asked in the first verse by Arjuna. Now in the last section, that is verses 27 to 35, as I mentioned previously, this is a bonus section. And Krishna explains the Jnana Chakshu. What is Jnana? That is knowledge. And what does Chakshu means? Chakshu means the eyes or the vision. So this section can be called as the vision of knowledge. So Krishna has already answered, all of Arjuna's 6 questions. And now he is explaining the created a, without the superior nature, that is the living entity, nothing can grow. Have you seen something growing as such? No. Unless and until there is a touch of the superior nature, we can see that our bodies grow. The children are growing and they are growing to the adults. So unless and until there is a touch of the superior nature, nothing can grow. So the material nature is created by the Supreme Lord, and the superior nature is material nature. And thus all these activities and manifestations are taking place. So in the next verse, Krishna also explains the true seer's vision of the Paramatma. Krishna explains here, anyone who by good association, am I not clear, Prabhuji? Sorry.
Yes, Harshad Prabhu, can you switch off your video? I think so. The internet connection is low.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Is it just now or it is
No,
happening for quite some time?
Some time back it started.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. So, in the 28th verse, Krishna explains the true seer's vision of the Paramatma. And Krishna explains, anyone who by association can see 3 things combined together: the body, the proprietor of the body, or individual soul, and the friend of the individual soul, that is Paramatma. And that could be called as an, incomplete, that person can be called as a person with complete vision or complete knowledge, or that could be called as a perfect vision. Unless one has the association of the real knower, one can't see these 3 things together. So again, the emphasis is on getting ourselves associated with devotees. In the 29th verse, Krishna explains the results of this mature vision as, has no degradation. So Krishna has already stated in verse 9.31, Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat shantim nigachati kaunteya pratijanehi name bhaktaha pranashyati. He has already stated name bhaktaha pranashyati. There is no fall for Krishna's devotees. So here Krishna is again emphasizing that if one sees the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every living and non-living things, he does not degrade himself by a destructive mentality, because that is considered as the perfect vision, and which is possible only with association with the devotees. And this would help one gradually advance to the spiritual world. For the same, we need to turn our mind to the super soul. And in the 30th verse, Krishna help us understand the true seer's vision about the jiva and prakriti. And Krishna explains this body is made of material nature, and whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not his doing. This body is given as per one's past desires and to enjoy or to have some sort of distresses. So practically speaking, the body is a machine, just like our car, designed by the Supreme Lord to fulfill our desires. And because of our desires, one is put into difficult circumstances to suffer or to enjoy. This transcendental vision of the living entity, when developed, makes one separate from bodily activities. One who has such vision is an actual seer. That is what, Prabhupada explains. And in the 31st verse, Krishna explains the Brahman vision. Material vision is to see separate identities to different material bodies. And mature vision is to see how beings of the same spiritual nature, souls, are expanded everywhere. By such a vision, one attains to the Brahman platform. After the destruction of the material body, the spirit soul is one. We know this. The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature and its desires to get, different types of bodies. And when one can see this, he attains, spiritual vision. Thus, being freed from the differentiations like man, animal, big, low, small, one becomes purified in consciousness and able to develop Krishna consciousness. Because the outer covering body may be different, but the soul is part and parcel of Krishna. And this was also explained in verse 5.18 that Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi Hastini Shruni Pandit Samadarshinaha. So one who has got a perfect knowledge, he has got that vision to look at everyone with equal vision. That is Panditaha Samadarshinaha. And in the next verse, Krishna confirms the soul to be a non-doer and it isn't entangled basically. He explained this by giving a couple of analogies in the next two verses. He confirms that the soul situated in the Brahman vision stays completely aloof. It's not contaminated. How this is possible? And Prabhupada has given an example of the sky. So sky is all pervading. It is mixing with everything like, dust, mud, stool and everything. And it still remains completely aloof. And the second analogy that is given is as the soul illuminates the entire body by the consciousness, in the same manner as the sun alone illuminates the whole universe. And we need to also understand that consciousness isn't a product of the combination of just matter. Sometimes the scientists, the so-called material scientists, they feel that by a combination of certain chemicals, consciousness is triggered. That's not true. It's the symptom of the soul. The consciousness of the living entity, although qualitatively one with the supreme consciousness, is not supreme because the consciousness of one particular body does not share that of another body. Forget about another body, we can't even share the consciousness of our own children. So we need to understand we are Anu Atma, whereas the Supreme Lord is Vibhu Atma. But the super soul, which is situated as a friend of the individual soul, is conscious of all bodies. And this is the basic difference, between the supreme consciousness and individual consciousness. And in the last verse of this particular chapter, Krishna provides summary as Falashruti. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that one should know the difference between the body, the owner of the body, and the super soul. We may feel that the learnings of the 13th chapter are probably most intimidating and challenging to comprehend also. However, one should recognize the process of liberation to go to the supreme destination, and that should be our key. And how that is possible? Once we have that faith, a faithful person, would get some good association, hear about the Supreme Lord to become enlightened. And upon acceptance of a spiritual master, one can learn to distinguish between matter and spirit. And that becomes a stepping stone for our further realization. So one can understand the body to be a matter which can be identified by the 24 elements, as Shanmukh Prabhu explained in the first few sections of this chapter. And that is the gross manifestation. And the subtle manifestation, of course, we know, is the mind, false ego, and, our desires, etc. But over and above this, there is a soul and the super soul. So one who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of the soul and material elements, as well as the super soul, and understand the super soul is having, situated at a different platform altogether, we can consider, that, soul or that jiva, becomes eligible for transferring to the spiritual world. So this brings me to the end of the chapter. Thank you so much for listening to me so patiently. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad Prabhu. So if somebody wants to ask some questions or somebody has some comments.
As
very
always,
well.
great analogy and excellent summary, Prabhuji. Just that in between we lost few. That recording also would have been helpful.
I'm so sorry. There was some problem with the electricity. The weather has become very inclement, and it's raining very heavily all of a sudden. I don't know what is the issue here.
It's in Pune, Prabhuji?
Yeah, in Pune. But thank you so much, Chandraprabhu, for your kind words.
Very clear, Harshad Prabhuji. Thank you so